The man reaches his hand into the boiling oil pan and fishes out instantly. He shoots the killer's head. Obviously, his hand has been fried to a crisp in the oil, but he can't feel the slightest bit of pain. Dylan could never have dreamed that he hates this constitution so much it can actually save his life at a crucial moment. And after Dylan has wasted more than 20 years of his life, he has finally found a life that suits him. He used to be working in a credit bank in San Diego. He gets up, brushes his teeth, and takes a shower in a boring routine every day. Because he can't feel physical pain, he can only eat liquid food in case he accidentally bites off his own tongue. He tries his best to act like a normal person. Even though he has to face the manager's scolding every morning, he has also gotten used to this submissive life. Until the appearance of a temporary worker named Aurea. Their casual eye contact makes this old virgin, who has been single for decades, for the first time feel what it's like to have a racing heart. However, the manager's inspiring words quickly pull him back to reality. Dylan's daily job is to collect the customers' loans. If the old man in front of him can't pay back the loan, Dylan can only seize the old man's mortgage property. However, seeing the old man in such a difficult situation, Dylan, who has a heart of compassion, decides to keep the agreement until after Christmas. Perhaps in this way, he will have enough time to raise the money to keep the place that holds the memories of him and his late wife. After finishing a day's work, even though Dylan has no feeling of fatigue, he still intends to treat himself to a cup of coffee, but just then Aurea calls him from behind. The boiling water immediately spills onto Dylan's hand. Realizing that she has caused trouble, Aurea is flustered and is about to deal with his wound. However, Aurea is a bit surprised by Dylan's calm appearance, as if it wasn't his hand that was scalded. Aurea is worried that he will be fired because of this, but Dylan tells her that he won't do that. So Aurea intends to invite him to lunch as an apology. Dylan refuses at first, but then he thinks this might be a good opportunity to get rid of his long-term single status. This is the first time Dylan has gone out for lunch with someone. Aurea is a bit puzzled because usually she only sees him in the office. It seems that he is not very good at socializing. Aurea orders a cherry pie and Dylan actually orders a sandwich juice. When Aurea wants him to taste the cherry pie, Dylan suddenly shows extreme aversion. Aurea is frightened by his excessive reaction. Realizing that he has been a bit out of line, Dylan explains to her that he has a genetic disease which affects his sympathetic nervous system, so he can't feel any pain or the temperature of hot and cold. But Aurea looks at him with admiration after hearing that if she couldn't feel any pain, doesn't that mean she would be a superhero? Little does she know that not being able to feel pain is actually a very terrifying thing. Just imagine you step on a nail and there is blood all over the ground, but you are completely unaware of it. So Dylan spent almost his entire childhood basically in the hospital. But Aurea said that this cherry pie is really extremely delicious. Look at him passing over this calorie bomb covered with cream and jam. This calorie bomb is really a calorie bomb. Out of curiosity, Dylan still made a brave attempt. Well, he swore that this was the most delicious thing he had ever eaten. Looking at his fresh appearance, Aurea also invited him to go to the bar for a wild party with her next time, but he, who was afraid of screwing things up, was a bit torn about whether to agree or not. So while playing games, he asked for the advice of his only friend. Fatty told him not to think about those boring things. Now a girl is inviting him to the bar. If he doesn't act like a man, he will definitely live in regret for the rest of his life. Most importantly, even if he screws up, he doesn't have much to lose now. However, when he reached the entrance of the bar, Dylan was still trembling all over with nervousness. The bar is a whole new world for him. In the past, he had been leading a 2.1 life as a corporate slave, but when he saw Aurea appearing in front of him in a hot girl outfit, Dylan knew that he didn't want to live that miserable life ever again in his life. Aurea said that he was an orphan before he was 12 years old. He wandered around everywhere. He had never had a full meal until later he was adopted. He had a brother who was very kind to him and also his adoptive parents, but he really hated the feeling of causing trouble to others. So after he turned 18, he came out to life independently. He and Dylan were definitely from two different worlds. However, it was precisely because they had complementary topics they talked very congenially, but at this moment, an uninvited guest crashed into their date. He seemed to be a friend of Dylan's from middle school. Seeing that Dylan was still alive, the man almost dropped his jaw in surprise, and he obviously knew that Dylan couldn't feel pain, so even though he just came over to say hello, he still took the opportunity to sarcasm him severely. But Dylan was used to this. After all, they had done even worse things to him before, for example giving him some excessive nicknames, and they would often use him as a punching bag. But he even has to set an alarm for going to the toilet. Otherwise, since he can't feel anything, he will unconsciously wet his pants. In fact, this is a very embarrassing thing. So when he came out of the toilet, when he saw the man flirting with Aria, Dylan had a complicated feeling. He didn't know that Aria was setting up a plan to restore his dignity. As long as one of them drinks this special strong liquor, without showing any expression, one of them can get the opportunity to date her. The man drank it all in one gulp. He got drunk very soon. The man coughed violently. His snot was flowing all over, while Dylan beside him watched his joke expressionlessly. Aria bluntly said that this was Dylan's favorite. This was also the first time for Dylan to feel elated in front of his friend. Aria went home with him. She looked at the books covering the whole wall in Dylan's house. It seemed that he had just read about how to date a girl yesterday. Dylan was very much like a methodical and artistic boy. So when she saw the tattoo on Dylan's arm, Aria widened her eyes. This tattoo actually extends from his arm to his whole body. Upon hearing Dylan say that he drew all these tattoos by himself, Aria was somewhat disbelieving. His tattoos were sexy and astonishing. It's hard to imagine how much time and effort he spent to complete this great work. Watching Aria half pushing and half embracing as she pinned him down, Dylan just felt that his mind was about to go blank. Dylan couldn't remember either how he got through last night. However, the warm bed beside him and the note Aria left on his pillow confirmed everything that happened last night. It wasn't a dream. This was the first time he felt hopeful about life. Everything around him seemed so wonderful. He even took the initiative to take a bite of bread. When he saw that his tongue in the mirror was intact, he even let out a surprised scream because he was too excited. He almost crashed into someone else's car on his way to work, and the dolls hugging each other in the office don't seem so annoying now. He couldn't wait to finish the day's work so that he could spend another unforgettable and ecstatic night with Aria. However, just as he was imagining that his life was about to reach another climax, suddenly 3 Santa Clauses walked into the bank hall. The sudden robbery threw the whole into chaos. Everyone lay on the ground with their hands on their heads. The robbers looked around and picked up the bank manager, with one hand telling him to open the vault door immediately, but they didn't expect that the manager was actually a tough guy. Even though he was beaten by the robbers until his face was covered in blood, he still refused to open the vault door. But during the scuffle, the mask on the robber's face suddenly fell off. After a gunshot, the manager's brains splattered all over Aria. Seeing that the police were about to arrive, the furious robber grabbed Dylan. When he saw that Dylan didn't cooperate, he directly punched him hard. The manager beside him died with his eyes wide open. It seemed that he was also about to be brutally killed. Suddenly Aria beside him opened her mouth to plead for him. This made the already annoyed robber even angrier. Aria was slapped hard by him. The clear slapping sound woke Dylan up. Watching the robber press the gun against Aria's head and about to pull the trigger, Dylan shouted at him to stop. In order to save Aria's life, he had to tell the robber the vault password, but after the robber got what he wanted, he directly knocked Dylan unconscious. Then, he entered the vault and ransacked it wildly, preparing to flee. However, the police arrived at this moment. In order to escape, the robber took Aria as a hostage. To get away, in order to prevent them from hurting the hostage, the police had to obediently put down their sidearms. They didn't know that this just gave this group of fierce robbers the opportunity to break through the encirclement. After a round of shooting, most of the police were killed or injured. The robbers were well trained. They had already planned their escape route. At this time, the intense gunfire woke Dylan up. The manager beside him had completely cooled down, but Aria was nowhere to be seen. He crawled out from behind the counter and saw that it was in chaos outside. Seeing that Aria was taken away by the robbers, Dylan rushed out of the door and was about to chase after them in a police car. However, he saw the police officer lying on the ground struggling in pain after a fierce internal struggle in his mind. He still chose to take out his belt first to help the police officer stop the bleeding. Then, regardless of the police officer's dissuasion, he picked up the gun on the ground and drove after them. The robbers fled at high speed. They thought everything was fine, but they didn't expect that Dylan, who was eager to save people, was like crazy. Chasing after them at a high speed, the robbers behind the store fired a burst of gunshots, but still couldn't shake off Dylan. The robbers thought they had met a tough opponent. They immediately decided to split into two groups. Then they would meet at the agreed place. Dylan, who didn't know what to do, had to randomly choose one group to chase after. He prayed that he must make the right choice, but he was led into a dead end by the robbers. A serious car accident occurred. Dylan found that Oriel wasn't in this car. He had no choice but to take out his gun and threaten. The robber surrendered, but when he learned that Dylan wasn't a police officer, the robber, who was originally eager to escape, realized that it was just a false alarm. Seeing his hand holding the gun shaking violently, the robber realized that he was a novice who had never fired a gun before, and usually such novices are the easiest targets to bully. Dylan was attacked by him, and the gun in his hand was knocked away. The two of them chased and fled. They came to the back kitchen of a fast food restaurant. The robber was in a hurry to pick up the gun, but he was thrown to the ground by Dylan with a bear hug. Dylan hid under the dining table and thought about countermeasures. When the robber wasn't paying attention, he picked up the hot frying pan and smashed the robber's pistol. The robber still tried to snatch the frying pan, but he was burned by the hot frying pan and howled in pain. Even more incredibly, Dylan was like an unkillable cockroach. No matter how many times he threw Dylan down, this guy could easily get up. It made the robber think that he had encountered a ghost. The unlucky Dylan directly threw the knife at the robber's bulletproof vest. Realizing that something was wrong, Dylan turned around and ran. He also threw the things he picked up over casually to disrupt the opponent's vision. As a result, the strong robber directly pounced on him and hit him hard. Even though Dylan couldn't feel the pain, he could still feel that his whole body was about to fall apart. As a last resort, he picked up a bag of flour and smashed it hard on the robber's head. Then he took the opportunity to look around to see if there was anything around that he could use. Killing someone for the first time, Dylan was so scared that he froze on the spot looking at the robber's terrible appearance. Dylan just felt a wave of nausea. He vomited directly, but he still endured the discomfort. He fished out a mobile phone from the robber's body. He also took a photo of the robber's tattoo. Then he drove the robber's car and escaped. With no way out, he could only call Fatty for help. When Fatty heard that he had just killed a robber and was also shot once, Fatty was really frightened. Dylan asked him to help search for the tattoo photo first and the call records of the mobile phone. Although they were just online friends and had never met in person offline, at this moment the only person he could trust was Fatty. And it's a matter of life and death. Aurea might be being abused by the robbers, waiting for him to save her. When he heard that Fatty was willing to help, Dylan felt relieved. But now he had to find a way to deal with his wound first. On the other side, the police had already arrived at the robbery scene. 2 FBI agents were ordered to investigate the scene. The manager was killed on the spot. 3 robbers were on the run. With one hostage, several other police officers were dead or seriously injured. However, surprisingly, a bank assistant robbed a police car and chased after the robbers. According to the eyewitnesses, it was also him who opened the vault for the robbers, and he also saved a seriously injured police officer with a belt. Now, it's very difficult for the police to determine his nature. They can only issue a wanted notice for Dylan as well. Agent Nova picked up Dylan's belt and examined it for a while. He didn't know that the owner of this belt was in a hardware store. Trying to take out the bullet stuck in his arm, he simply bandaged his severely scalded right hand. Then, he picked up a utility knife and made a small cut, and used pliers to dig out the bullet from his arm. The old man beside him was stunned, especially when this guy actually used a bottle of 502 glue to sew up the wound. But after all, he had lost too much blood. He felt a bit dizzy, so he simply took out a shot of adrenaline and injected it into his body. The effect was really refreshing. Having solved the problems of the old man and himself, Dylan's next step was to rescue Aurea. And on the other side, the robber he killed had also been found by the police. The scene was in a mess. The robber's death was even more miserable. Nova learned from the employees that the person who killed the robber was a crazy guy wearing a tie. He should be the missing bank assistant Dylan. Caleb retrieved Dylan's identity information, confirming that he didn't have any criminal record. Then, what was it that could make this honest man do such crazy things? After getting Dylan's phone number, Nova immediately called him. He coaxed patiently, asking him to come back and surrender himself, and hand over the stolen money voluntarily. In this way, he could plead with the judge for Dylan to get a lighter sentence. Dylan was greatly alarmed. He quickly explained that he was just trying to save his girlfriend, even though the police promised to help rescue the hostage. But Dylan knew that 75 of the hostages would be silenced by the robbers within 3 hours after being taken hostage. Nova was speechless because his reason was very valid, so saying do as you like was the greatest help he could offer to Dylan. On the other side, the remaining robbers waited for their companions to come back, but in vain. The atmosphere suddenly became a bit dull. The leader Zane was trying his best to soothe his companions' emotions. However, the scene changed. Aurea turned out to be one of the robbers, and she was also the leader's sister. Zane thought that he had taken the fate play too seriously just now and made her unhappy, but he didn't know that Aurea was just worried about Dylan. What's more, Zane had promised her that no one would get hurt, but in the end he killed someone. However, if it wasn't for Aurea being busy falling in love and having no time to get the bank vault password from Dylan, how could they be in such a mess? Now Zane only cares about whether he can get the money and then escape to Mexico smoothly. If anyone dares to disrupt his plan, he will definitely make that person be shattered to pieces. At this moment, Dylan followed the clue given by Fatty and successfully found the origin of the robber's tattoo. After some persuasive coaxing, he thought he would see Aurea soon. But what he waited for was a burly man. It was too late for him to run when he realized something was wrong. So he pretended to be calm and showed his tattoo. He talked casually with the burly man, saying that he was also introduced by a friend. He thought the tattoo was very unique, so he wanted to get an identical one. However, the successive probing questions finally made the burly man suspicious. When the burly man took off his gloves and took out a knife, Dylan struck first. He pointed a gun at the man's head. He originally thought he had the upper hand, but he was attacked and his pistol was knocked away. Fortunately, Dylan dodged in time, so the burly man didn't blow his head off. Dylan made a desperate fight, but when his fist hit the burly man, it was like tickling. But even though the burly man was seriously injured, he wasn't someone that Dylan could easily deal with. Soon Dylan realized that one of his ribs was broken. But Dylan, who couldn't feel the pain, saw the broken glass on the ground. Looking at the glass shards on his fist, even the burly man felt terrified. Soon his tetanus fist landed on the burly man's face. Seeing that the burly man had lost the strength to struggle, Dylan picked up the tattoo pen beside him and pressed it on his body. After a series of torturing and interrogation, the burly man finally told the full name of the tattooed robber. Dylan finally stopped and let him go. And after telling this information to Fatty, Fatty quickly found out the detailed information of the robbers. This group of robbers were all veterans who had served in Iraq and were discharged. No wonder they were well-trained. Ordinary police officers simply couldn't do anything to them. Before leaving, Dylan also took an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. He simply disinfected himself, and at this moment Aurea still didn't know what kind of efforts Dylan had made to save him. But Ben's older brother, that is the other robber, couldn't sit still. However, not knowing the news of his younger brother's death, he still guessed that his younger brother might have gone home. Little did he know that with the help of the fat guy, Dylan was also on his way to the robber's dwelling. He opened the door and walked in on tiptoe. The room was a bit dim. It didn't seem like there was anyone there. However, when he stepped on the floor, Dylan suddenly felt as if someone had pushed him from behind. When he saw the meteor hammer in the mirror, he finally understood what was going on, but this was just the beginning. The crossbow arrow in the kitchen directly skewered his 2 legs like candied house. Although Dylan didn't feel any pain, it was really difficult to pull this thing out of his legs. Having suffered 2 setbacks in a row, Dylan said that this time he must find something to scout the way. Unexpectedly, the corridor that looked most like a place for an ambush turned out to be safe. Dylan silently cursed the robber's whole family in his heart. He searched through all the places but didn't find any useful clues. However, just as he was about to leave the room, What's even worse is that he is now bleeding all over. If no one rescues him, he will soon bleed to death. Forced by the situation, he had no choice but to call the fat guy for help. Upon hearing that he was trapped in a trap and couldn't move, the fat guy didn't want to get himself into trouble at first, but when he heard Dylan say that he regarded him, an online friend, as a true friend, the bond between men took effect automatically. The fat guy claimed that he would arrive on his Harley in 10 minutes. Unexpectedly, the robber arrived at the house one step ahead of him. The robber became extremely alert. As a result, he saw Dylan, who was hanging there. It was very awkward when the two of them met. Dylan claimed that he was just a thief who had broken into the wrong empty house. But the address in his hand exposed his identity just as the robber was about to question Dylan in detail. The leader called him. The leader said on the phone that he had seen the news of his younger brother's death, thinking that Dylan was definitely involved in his younger brother's death. The enraged robber wanted to send him to his death immediately. However, it would be too easy to let him die like this. It's really too easy on him. So the robber came up with a good idea. Dylan tried his best to stall for time, hoping to hold on until the fat guy came to his rescue. Unexpectedly, the robber even wanted to gouge out his eyes to vent his anger. The fat guy wearing a riding suit gave a powerful slap, knocked out the robber and saved Dylan. However, the fat guy in front of him was not as tall and mighty as he described himself online, but as long as he is a savior, who would care what their savior looks like? However, if there is another offline meeting of online friends next time, the fat guy hopes it won't be this exciting again. After a big hug, the two of them wanted to escape quickly. Unexpectedly, the robber, who was knocked out by the fat guy, suddenly woke up and attacked Dylan. In an instant, the two of them got into a fight. Seeing the situation was not good, the fat guy quickly went to find a weapon to help. But having a knife is better than having none. Even if his palm was pierced through, he could still make do with it. But the robber pulled out the knife with his backhand and was about to kill Dylan. Fortunately, at this moment, the fat guy used insecticide to confuse his sight. It seemed that victory was just around the corner, but the fat guy stepped on the trap at this moment. Now Dylan could only rely on himself to survive. He rolled around on the ground, constantly triggering the traps. The robber became furious and choked his neck tightly. It seemed that Dylan was about to suffocate, but the crossbow arrow that pierced his leg at this time gave him hope. He forcefully clamped the robber's head between his legs. The next second, he pressed the crossbow arrow down hard. The unlucky robber died just like that. Judging from Dylan's current bruised and battered appearance, it was really shocking. Fortunately, the fat guy was there to give him some simple first aid. When he heard that Dylan still wanted to save Aria, the fat guy originally wanted to persuade him to give up this idea, but at this moment the police arrived. The fat guy told him to leave the rest of the matter to the police. After all, he really needed to go to the hospital now, but Dylan said the police now suspected that he was one of the robbers. If he was caught, Aria would definitely be killed by the robbers. Dylan begged the fat guy to help him one more time. Now his chance of escape all depends on the Harley that the fat guy parked at the door, but the fat guy felt a little embarrassed. Seeing him dressed in a suit, Caleb and Nova thought he was Dylan. Unexpectedly, when they caught up and stopped the fat guy, they realized they had been deceived. And at this moment, Dylan, according to the robbers' phone, found the place where they were hiding. Zane was still waiting for his companions to come back so that they could flee to Mexico, but at this moment Aria wanted to part ways with him. After all, it was only him who had committed the murder. Perhaps she still had a chance to turn back. Now Zane was extremely disappointed in her. To prevent future troubles, he had no choice. But suddenly Dylan burst in and told him to put down the gun. He thought the robber was going to kill the hostage. Zane had really never seen such a fool. At this moment, he also recognized that Dylan was from the bank and killed two of his accomplices. Now, he actually said he came to save him. Regarding the other accomplice, Zane told him heartlessly that Aria was his sister. The whole bank robbery was planned by them. Dylan was just a pawn they used. In an instant, Dylan lost his fighting spirit. He didn't expect that his law had been false from the very beginning. Zane seized the opportunity and grabbed the gun with his backhand. Then, he landed an uppercut that knocked Dylan down directly, even though Dylan couldn't feel any pain. He clearly heard the sound of his heart breaking. Zane didn't want to spare his life at all. He dragged Dylan under the landing gear and wanted to crush his head with the car, just as Dylan was about to be killed under the car. Arya, who had a change of heart, saved Dylan, and the strange behavior of his sister made Zane somewhat incredulous. Just for this despicable man she was actually going to betray their own family. Did she really think of herself as a saint? Arya originally thought that her brother wouldn't kill her. However, the next second the gun was pressed against her head. Just as he was about to kill her, Caleb arrived in time and shot Zane dead. Dylan and Arya were thus saved. And this was also thanks to the fat guy for providing clues to the police. Arya would be charged for being an accomplice in the crime and would go to prison. Dylan was taken away by an ambulance. He would be convicted after receiving treatment and he might face multiple charges. However, just when Caleb thought it was all over, the supposedly dead Zane shot and wounded him. Nova didn't have time to react and was also hit by a bullet. The crazy Zane also killed the paramedic. Then he stole the ambulance and fled towards the port unexpectedly. This ambulance was originally intended to take Dylan to the hospital. Dylan waited for an opportunity to act behind him. Nova, along with Arya and the fat guy, closely followed Zane. Dylan slowly got up but was still discovered by Zane. He was handcuffed and couldn't move, and at this moment Zane was taking out his gun. Dylan directly picked up the oxygen tank and broke his thumb. Then, he picked up the pistol that had fallen to the ground. He was about to eliminate Zane. But just at this moment the pistol ran out of bullets. On the other side, Arya knew that her brother was going to Pier 7 to take a ship and flee to Mexico, so she quickly took a shortcut and tried to intercept him. At this time Dylan in the ambulance also didn't want to wait for death passively. He rummaged around. Finally, he fixed his eyes on the defibrillator beside him. This might be a really crazy idea. As the charging efficiency became higher and higher, Dylan could hardly bear the high voltage current, and at the moment when it was fully charged, he pressed the defibrillator hard against Zane's heart. Dylan didn't expect that he would act so thrillingly. He didn't feel any pain in his body, but his head was dizzy. He wanted to check whether Zane was dead or not, but he was knocked down to the ground by Zane instead. Then Zane picked up the stethoscope and strangled his neck tightly. No matter how much he struggled, Zane didn't loosen his grip even though Dylan stabbed him more than a dozen times with a scalpel. Zane just increased the strength in his hands even more as a last resort. Dylan risked having his neck cut and finally managed to escape. The two sides confronted each other for a moment and then started fighting again, and just when Dylan was at a disadvantage, Arya and the others arrived. Arya asked the fat guy to stay and take Nova to the hospital, and she herself ran towards the direction where the sound of the fight came from. At this time the situation was almost one-sided. Dylan had lost too much blood, and he couldn't exert any strength at all, and the brutal Zane even broke one of his hands. This crazy man slowly got up. Just as he was about to crush Dylan's head, Arya shot him. When she wanted to rush over and finish him off, she was attacked by Zane again, and was slammed hard against the carriage. The intense pain in her body made Arya unable to straighten her back, but she still tried her best, picked up a brick beside her and fought him desperately, but with just a woman's strength she couldn't contend with him at all. At this time Dylan saw the last hope. It was the adrenaline in the first aid kit. Zane never dreamed that the one who would finally end him would actually be that useless guy he had always looked down upon. And after saving Arya, Dylan finally couldn't hold on anymore. When Dylan woke up in the hospital, the first person he saw was actually the fat guy. The fat guy said that Dylan was really a guy who didn't care about his life. He had an open fracture in his right hand, severe burns, a bunch of broken ribs and a concussion, and the excessive use of adrenaline almost caused a heart attack. But this guy actually managed to wake up. It was simply a Christmas miracle. And just when he was worried about Arya, Nova, who had just come back from the court, told him that had better worry about himself first. He was charged with multiple counts such as murder and dangerous driving. However, his contribution in helping the police solve the robbery case was also a real achievement, and Nova specifically emphasized to the judge that he was a white man working in a bank, so in the end he wouldn't receive a too severe punishment. After being discharged from the hospital, Dylan went to the prison to visit Arya as soon as possible. She was convicted of being an accomplice in the crime and had to serve a few months in prison. Perhaps for them a short separation would make their relationship even stronger. Dylan was very grateful to her for bringing him out of that closed world. So on the originally blank part of his chest, he got a tattoo of Arya's portrait. Everything was developing in a positive direction, just like the first time Dylan tried cherry pie. In the future, he should have many more first-time experiences, but with Arya by his side, he would be as fearless as a real hero.